Greetings and welcome to the channel. This is Michaela from Team Retrogue, where we like retro games and the devices that bring them to us. So today we are looking at a budget under $100 device called the TrimUI Smart Pro. Now this device does come with some compromises given the fact that it is under $100, but here's the shocking part. The compromises are not that bad, and the device ended up surprising me on what it was actually capable of. So we're going to take a look at this device, we're going to find out what it's made of, and if for the cost of a modern day video game, this is worth your hard-earned dollar bucks. So let's dive in, and let's get to work. Now you can purchase the TrimUI Smart Pro from Mech DIY, and the price starts at $79.99 US for the console without a memory card. And Mech DIY also offers free standard shipping, so this does make this an under $100 budget device. So let's hop on our mount and right on into Spec Town. So the CPU is an Allwinner A133P capable of 1.8 gigahertz, and the GPU is an Imagination Power VR GPU. Now I don't know where this falls in the realm of GPU-ness, but based on the title, you can imagine it has quite a bit of power. See what I did there? Imagination, you can imagine it. Dad joke! Silliness aside, this GPU is a G3 8300 660 MHz GPU for your numbers people out there. The unit has 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, and it has 8 GB of onboard storage with SD card slot expansion. So your ROMs will go on the SD card, and the operating system is more than likely going to be on that 8 GB of storage. The star of the show here with this device is the 4.96-inch 720p IPS screen. There is LED lighting around the joysticks, and you have a 5,000 milliamp hour battery. The device is capable of Wi-Fi, you have 2 USB-C ports that serve 2 different functions, and the device runs on a custom Linux operating system specifically designed for this handheld. Now let's go ahead and jump into the unboxing. Now this device was provided to me by Mech DIY for the purposes of this review. All opinions are my own, no money exchanged hands, and they are not seeing this video before it goes live. And this is going to be a fairly quick unboxing, but I do want to take a minute and just point out that the box is nice. It's colorful, it actually explains what's in the device, and it gives the specifications right on there, and you get a clear color picture as to what you're getting in the box. And sure enough, in the box, here is our TrimUI Smart Pro. So we'll put that aside for a second, and really all we have here is a USB-A to USB-C cable, and not much else. So let's go ahead and let's open up this device. And first impressions are, I am getting Game Boy DMG meets PlayStation Vita vibes. That's kind of how it feels ergonomically and physically to me. And so this is a perfect opportunity to start our tour of the device, and we'll start with the triggers and the bumpers. And I'm going to be frankly honest with you, I'm not a fan of these triggers. The bumpers are okay, they're your standard clicky bumpers, but the triggers just don't have a lot of travel to them. Thankfully, this doesn't seem like the kind of device where you're going to use the triggers very much. On the top of the device, you have the power button, volume button, and you have a USB-C cable that says host. That is actually to plug in wired controllers. And then on the right side of the device, you have the right trigger and right bumper. On the front of the device, you have that 4.96-inch screen, and you also have two joysticks. Now, these are Vita-style joysticks. They don't click L3 and R3, which in 2023, that's a very odd decision to make. I mean, I guess I should be glad that there's joysticks at all, but when you factor in something like the Retroid Pocket line of devices that do click L3 and R3, it's a weird choice. But the D-pad on this device is not bad at all. It feels very clicky. I want to say it's a dome-style connection, and if it's not, it feels like one. And likewise with the face buttons. I actually really like the face buttons. There isn't a lot of travel to them, and they are quite clicky. They might be dome switches, but they feel right. I don't know how to explain it other than they're just pleasant buttons to push. And then here on the bottom of the device, you have an FN switch, which apparently toggles between a power save and a performance mode. There's also some mysterious cover, like there's supposed to be a port here that they just decided not to put in. And I don't know what this is about. I tried to take this cover out, but I couldn't. So I don't really know what this is for or what was supposed to go there. But for now, there's just a cover there. There's also your second USB-C port, your mic hole, and your SD card slot. So this unit came with a generic 128 gigabyte SD card, and it did come preloaded with ROMs. And you also have your headphone jack on the bottom. Now the back is very minimally designed. There are no ergonomic grips or anything here. It's just a flat unit. It feels like a PlayStation Vita. You do have 4 screws that you can unscrew to get into the unit should you need to, and there is some minimal branding on the back as well. Now let's go ahead and turn this device on and talk about the out-of-the-box experience with this custom Linux OS that comes packaged with this unit. Now, I'm very used to saying in videos like this that you want to throw away the stock operating system and go for something else, but this is actually a fairly decent OS. It starts you off with some categories, multi-cartridges, Pokemon, arcade vertical, and you could go in there and you could pick from the pre-built ROMs that are on that image. Or if you hit the menu button, you could search your ROM library that way. And your L and R buttons navigate through different categories. So you can go by system, you can do NetPlay, you could see specific apps that are preloaded in this operating system. And there's also a user guide that you can reference if you need it. And so, well, I do recommend that you generally replace the stock SD card with a more reputable brand. This is a more pick up and play unit. If you are just looking for a cheap under $100 device that you could just turn on and start playing games with, then ordering this with a preloaded memory card is probably going to be the way to go for you. Now, when scrolling through the list of games, I was actually very surprised to see Dreamcast on the list. And I thought to myself, could this really play Dreamcast? And they did kind of load it up with some decent games. So I just went ahead and booted up Sonic 2. Now, I'm going to be honest. I had zero expectations. In fact, I expected this game to run like butt. And it didn't. And I ended up playing through the whole first level of Sonic Adventure 2 and not getting any stuttering. I couldn't believe it. Now, these joysticks aren't the best, but the gameplay is not bad here for Dreamcast. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised and could see myself playing my way through Sonic Adventure 2 on this device. Now, before we get into any further gameplay testing, we need to upgrade the firmware on this device. And you'll need a computer to do that, and I'll leave a link in the video description on where you can get the firmware update as well as written directions on how to update the firmware on the TrimUI Smart Pro. And I do recommend that you upgrade the firmware because it will give you a little bit more control over your device. For example, there are display, volume, and Wi-Fi settings here, and one of the first things I did was lower the BGM volume on the menu to 0 because the menu music was kind of annoying. So I'm very glad that there actually is an option to turn that off. You can also go into the system settings and you could refresh your ROMs list, change the date and time, factory reset, calibrate the joysticks. There's a whole bunch of stuff that are necessary for a device like this that you could run from the system settings. You can also turn the LEDs around the joysticks on and off. You could change the screen brightness and you could change the LED brightness. Unfortunately, you cannot change the LEDs for a specific color. It will always cycle through a series of colors. And so I'm hoping that they'll address that in a future update because I like my LEDs to be a specific static color. For the moment, it doesn't look like that's possible. You can also access your Wi-Fi settings from this tab, and you can connect to a Wi-Fi network just like with any other device. Just because there's a lack of a touchscreen, you will need to put in a password using the D-pad and the controller buttons. Now, when you boot up a game and press the menu button, you're going to be presented with a generic list very similar to TrimUI, but then hitting that advanced menu button will actually bring you into the full RetroArch menu, and I actually really like this feature because I have simple save and load state functions if I need it, but then if I need to do something more advanced, I can use the same RetroArch functions that I'm already used to, which includes putting in my Retro Achievements username and password, and then we're going to go ahead and we'll boot up this Animaniacs game again, and boom. Because we have Wi-Fi, now we have Retro Achievements. And so let's get into some game testing here, and we're going to start with Game Boy Advance. And as you would expect, your 8 and 16-bit systems are going to run just fine. And I've always found that these 16:9 screens do handle Game Boy Advance very well. They do manage the 3:2 aspect ratio very decently with minimal bezels on the side. And Game Boy Advance is one of my favorite systems of all time, so I plan on doing a video in the future on the best systems to play Game Boy Advance on, and this system just might make the list. But then I also decided to try something new and try emulating Game & Watch. Now, the Game & Watch is a very interesting series of handheld consoles because they were these electronics with a static background, and the only thing that was mobile were the static images that kept changing on the screen depending on what buttons you pushed. And so this is a very simple version of Mario Brothers where Mario and Luigi team up to move a bunch of stuff onto a conveyor belt and get it onto a truck. And the way this system is emulated is pretty darn good, and it does take up the whole screen. But then you could fast forward back into the SNES era, and you can play your SNES games no problem as well. So this system is a good mix of old and new retro games, which I know is kind of an odd thing to say, but yeah, old and new retro games. I guess that's a thing. But SNES works great. And pretty much any system that is D-pad centric will be a good experience because you can avoid these bad joysticks that they decided to put in this device. And consequently, that also includes PS1 games. So here is Mega Man X4 running on the PCSX Rearmed core, and as you can see, this is running very well. I used to run through this game multiple times back in my younger days, and so anytime I have a chance to kind of relive that moment of my young life, I try to take advantage of it. Now, I showed you the success that I had with Dreamcast earlier in this video, but I do also want to touch up on a couple of standalone emulators that come with the TrimUI Smart Pro, and one of them is this old antiquated version of Drastic that doesn't let you do very much at all. And I couldn't find any way of changing this to a RetroArch core like Melon DS, which probably would have given me some better options. I was stuck using this Drastic standalone, and I just don't like it. I want to be able to fill up the whole screen. I want to be able to adjust screen sizes and all that. And so I don't find this to be a good way of playing DS games. But as far as frame rate and playability, yeah, that's okay. But also, there's no touchscreen here, so you have to kind of fiddle around with the right joystick and R2 buttons and try to actually use a fake stylus here. And so I really would not recommend using this system for Nintendo DS unless you really have no other option. However, what I did find is that PSP was surprisingly playable on this device. Now, God of War here seems to be capping out at about 20 to 21 frames per second, and this is a harder game to emulate, but you'll notice it occasionally bounces up to 30, and I'm not sure if there's any frame skip or anything on, but I found this to be surprisingly playable. But now let's talk about this little FN button on the left bottom of the device here. And the whole time I've been testing, that has been to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it to the right. And through the power of science, we're going to find out if God of War is going to perform any better. And the answer to that is, well, not much. I did notice some spots where I did hit 30 frames per second sooner, or it was happening more frequently, but I still found that it capped out at about 21 frames per second, which again, surprisingly playable, but PSP is probably not performing as best as it could on this device versus other devices. So I would consider it more of a bonus if you can get good performance out of PSP games. And honestly, you could play Chains of Olympus on this. It wasn't bad. Alright, so let's wrap things up with my final thoughts. And let's start with the good. And there's a lot of good here for a sub $100 device. The emulation on this device surprised me. Dreamcast and PSP running decently on a sub $100 handheld. That's not something you see very often, and it's great to see it here. In addition, the stock OS surprised me as well, which would make this a very decent handheld to actually give as a present to somebody, because it does offer somewhat of a pick up and play experience. As a matter of fact, I did the less amount of tweaking on this device than I've done on other devices, but it was great to still have that option to go into RetroArch and do some more advanced tweaking. In my opinion, the D-pad and the face buttons are great. They responded very well to everything that I personally threw at them, and I enjoyed the tactile experience of using these buttons to play games. This has a very nice, almost 5-inch 16:9 screen for a small handheld, rivaling that of the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. And you have built-in Wi-Fi for retro achievements as well as NetPlay. Now, unfortunately, especially at this price point, no device is perfect, so let's talk about some of the negatives. And we're going to start with these darn Vita joysticks. Why? Why in 2023 are we still using these Vita joysticks? Are they really that inexpensive? We have several devices at this price point that have clickable L3 and R3. So it's just very confusing that they would choose to not use those joysticks and instead throw these Vita style ones in. It just boggles my mind. I also wish companies would stop putting start and select either all the way on the right or all the way on the left, it's not very ergonomic, it's not very intuitive, and it makes RetroArch shortcuts a lot harder to access, especially with hotkeys and all that. Now, thankfully, that's mitigated on this device with the menu button, but it's still a pain in the neck. The Retroid Pocket 4 is going to do this as well, and I don't get why we're keeping our start and select buttons all on one side. I mean, granted, the Retroid Pocket 3 and 3 Plus had start and select on the top, and that was an even worse place to put them, but please put the start button on the right and select button on the left and call it a day. Can we do that, please? Now, fortunately, the last two issues I had with this device could potentially be fixed by a software update, and that's the fact that we're running this old crappy version of Jurassic for NDS emulation. So an option to be able to use a RetroArch core would actually be better in this situation. And I would like the ability to have the LEDs just be one color. So if there's a way to update that, this device would definitely move up a couple of points in my book. But I'd have to say, overall, if you are on a budget of under $100 and you are looking for something that can play PS1 with a smattering of Dreamcast and a smattering of PSP, this device is a contender. And I do have to say, despite its flaws, it did surprise me, and I did find myself playing games and enjoying them on this device. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I didn't have to go in messing with SD cards and tweaking software. I could kind of just pick this device up, use the stock OS, and go into a game and start playing. And I really enjoyed that experience. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this a decent budget handheld? Are you picking one up? Or for just under $100, is there a handheld that you feel you would recommend over the TrimUI Smart Pro? And please feel free to continue the conversation in the Retro Handhelds and the Steam Machine Discord channels. It's where you can find me hanging out in between videos, and I would love to hear your input on this device as well as others. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if this was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.